Chapter 11, Part 2, of History of the Christian Church during the first 6 centuries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sean F. Sawyers. History of the Christian Church during the first 6 centuries by S. Cheatham. Chapter 11, Controversies on the Faith. Part 2, the Holy Trinity. 1. The greatest dogmatic conflict which the Church had to endure broke out in the early part of the 4th century. Arius was a person of considerable mark among the presbyters of Alexandria. He is described as a man of impressive appearance and of strictly ascetic life, yet with kindly and attractive manner and bearing. But he was charged with a certain vanity and lightness of mind. He had been a pupil of the famous Lucian of Antioch, who had been accused of sharing the opinions of Paul of Samosata, and these views he also was thought to hold. The first beginnings of the strife are obscured by discrepancy of testimony, but on the tenets of Arius there is practically no doubt. In his view, the Son is a creation out of nothing by the will of God the Father, a divine being created before the worlds, but still a creature. As a father must exist before his son, the Son of God is not co-eternal with the Father. There was a time when he was not. It was through him that God made the worlds, yet he is not in his proper nature incapable of sin, though by the exertion of his own will he was preserved from it. Against this, Alexander, Bishop of Alexandria, asserted the coexistence of God the Father and God the Son from all eternity. Never was there a time when the Father was not the Father, when the Son was not the Son. Doctrines so startling as those of Arius could not pass unquestioned. For some years the church in Alexandria was disturbed by the disputes which arose about them. Alexander probably hoped to overcome Arius by gentle treatment. When he was disappointed in his hope, Arius was at length excommunicated by a synod of about 100 African and Libyan bishops, and with him certain presbyters and deacons of Alexandria, while the Libyan bishops Theonas and Secundus were deposed from their offices. Driven from Alexandria, Arius betook himself to Palestine, whence he wrote to his old fellow student under Lucian, Eusebius, the influential bishop of Nicomedia, who at once bestirred himself to gain adherents for him. He was so successful that a Bithynian synod under his influence pronounced in favor of the opinions of Arius, and Eusebius of Caesarea attempted to mediate between Alexander and his presbyter. To whatever influence it may have been due, Arius returned to Alexandria and resumed his functions. Several bishops took his part, but Alexander and his friends remained firm. And not only did bishop contend with bishop, mob contended with mob in many cities of the East. It was at this critical time that Constantine overcame Licinius and became sole ruler of the Roman world. When the strife in the church came to his knowledge, he wrote, or caused to be written, a remarkable letter to Alexander and Arius. The discussion appeared to him a mere play of nimble wits, asking questions which ought not to be asked and giving answers which ought not to be given. He begs the combatants, therefore, to restore to their emperor his quiet days and tranquil nights by making such mutual concessions as may restore peace to the church. The letter, however, produced no good result, nor could Hosius of Cordova, the emperor's confidential adviser, who brought it to Alexandria, effect a reconciliation between the opposing parties. There was one in Alexandria who, though his works belonged mainly to a later period, had already the influence which his character could not fail to win, and who would certainly not tolerate any compromise with error. This was Athanasius, who was constantly by the side of Alexander, and who maintained now, as throughout his eventful life, with all his force, the great truth, that the Son was God from all eternity, that he became very man. It is to be observed that Athanasius connects the divinity of the Son with the redemption of man much more prominently than his contemporaries. How, he asks, could Christ make us partakers of the divine nature if he were himself only a partaker and not the source and origin of it? This lies indeed at the root of the Athanasian theology. In the Son we have the Father. Whoso knoweth the Son knoweth the Father. If the Son be a creature, we cannot worship him. One who held these views could evidently not concede one jot or one tittle to the Arians. Constantine's well-meant attempt, therefore, came to nothing. As, however, the emperor attached the utmost importance to the unity of the Church, which he hoped to make the chief bond of the unwieldy empire, he determined to make yet another effort to secure it. He resolved, by the advice of Hosius, to invite the bishops of the whole Church to a council at Nicaea in Bithynia, not far from the southern shore of the Black Sea. The emperor himself issued the summonses, placed the public posting houses at the disposal of the bishops, who journeyed to Bithynia, and provided for their maintenance. From all parts of the empire they came, and even from beyond its limits arrived a Persian and a Scythian. They came, we may well believe, full of hope at the new prospects which were opening to the Church, and with some curiosity to see the great ruler of the Roman world. The Bishop of Rome, who was precluded by his advanced age from undertaking the journey to Nicaea, was represented by two presbyters. His name does not appear in any of the documents connected with the council, and it is quite uncertain whether he was one of those whose advice the emperor privately sought. Eusebius reckons the number of bishops who took part in the council at more than 250, and these were accompanied by a very large number of presbyters, deacons, and other attendants. Among the deacons was Athanasius. Athanasius makes the whole number 318, a number which Ambrose observed with delight was that of Abraham's trained servants, and which has ever since remained the traditional number of attendants at the council, so that it is frequently referred to as the 318. The Greeks attended in large numbers. Of the Latins, who were much less numerous, the most distinguished representatives were the well-known Hosius and Cecilian of Carthage. Many of those who were present were highly respected for their piety and for the sufferings which they had endured in the still recent persecution. Some were distinguished theologians, some were probably simple men to whom the very watchwords of the contest were new and strange. There were present also at some of the preliminary discussions many laymen, skilled rhetoricians, ready to advocate the views of one side or the other. It was the fluent talk of these gentlemen which roused one of the confessors, himself a layman, to declare that Christ and the apostles handed down to us no dialectic art or vain craft, but simple maxims guarded by faith and good works. It is not improbable that, as Rufinus implies, even heathen philosophers took part in these informal debates. The great assembly met in the largest room of the palace at Nicaea, in which there was placed at one end a gilded chair for the emperor, while the seats of the bishops were arranged on each side. When the members of the council were placed, the emperor, in splendid robes, entered the hall, without military guard, and passed with stately tread to the seat placed for him, in which, however, he did not place himself until some of the bishops motioned him to do so. When he was seated, one of the bishops, either Eusebius of Caesarea or Eustathius of Antioch, rose and addressed him. When this address was ended, Constantine rose, and with a pleasant countenance and in a gentle voice made his reply, thanking God for having permitted him to see the representatives of the Church brought together into one assembly, and earnestly entreating his hearers to maintain the peace and harmony which became the ministers of God. On concluding his speech, which was in Latin, and was at once rendered into Greek by an interpreter, he handed over the conduct of the meeting to the presidents and left the hall. Who the presidents, proadroi, were is uncertain. It is natural to suppose that Hosius of Cordova, who was the emperor's confidant, and whose name stands first among the signatures to the decrees, was at any rate one of them. Others were probably the prelates of the two great sees of Alexandria and Antioch, Alexander and Eustathius, perhaps also Eusebius of Caesarea. There were three groups in the assembly: the small party of Arians, under the guidance of Eusebius of Nicomedia, the party of Alexander, to which the western bishops generally belonged, and the moderate men who looked upon Eusebius of Caesarea as their leader. It was acknowledged on all hands that the council was bound to produce such an authoritative statement of the true faith as might serve to guide the minds of believers